Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the BFG podcast. Today we have the absolute pleasure of having General Manager of the Wellington Phoenix with us, David Dome. We also have, as a special guest co-host, my co-owner of the Fight for the Next Phoenix group, Denise Duffy. Welcome to the both of you.
Hi, Blake.
Thanks, Blake, for having us.
So, to start, David, the obvious question is, please tell the viewers, how did you become the general manager of the Phoenix?
Gosh, that's going way back now, Blake. Going back a few years now. I remember the Phoenix's first game. I was at the Phoenix's first game at what it was, Westpac Stadium then. And just being completely captured by it and loving it and going, this is something. I mean, if you remember, it was a great crowd. We drew the game, scored at the end. It was a great result for the club, a great result for the city, and I just remember being absolutely captured by it and thinking at that time I'd love to be part of that. I don't know how, but I'd love to be part of that. I was in finance at that stage, working for. I think at that stage, so I'd come through like banking systems and that sort of stuff, mostly through sort of marketing and strategic marketing type roles. I think I was at Fujitsu at that stage, and then the marketing role came up, and I just applied. I applied through the advertisement. I met with Tony Pinata, I think 3 times. There was a meeting, an interview, then there was a coffee, and then there was another coffee. And then he eventually gave me the job. And then from there, those were pretty tumultuous years when Terry owned the club. But Terry saved it from when it was potentially going to go under, when Auckland couldn't sustain a professional football club anymore. So Terry did a fantastic job in keeping it going. And then in 2011, it became clear that he didn't even have with the financial crisis the way it was, Terry's ability to finance the club, became very, very difficult. And then Wellnix came in. Lloyd Morrison, who has passed away, sadly, he started the whole thing. He got a whole lot of very successful Wellingtonians on board, including his brother Rob, and they came in towards the end of 2011. And then Nathan Greenham at that time was like an interim CEO. Nathan left soon after that, 2011, November, December, sometime around then, and then we went through a bit of a process of looking for a replacement general manager for a while. We interviewed quite a few people. I was actually involved in that in a small way. We had people from around the world, and then I was part of that process. I threw my hat in the ring as well, and Wellnix gave me the job. I can't exactly remember. I think it was April 2012, and that was almost 10 years ago now. Almost 10 years ago. So it's been a process. It's been a journey, that's for sure. It's been a bit of a wild ride, but it's been thoroughly enjoyable, and we've had some magnificent times over those 10 years, and even going back further than that, when I was doing the marketing role, when we had those final series here in Wellington, we had sellout crowds. It's been magnificent. So very, very honoured and privileged really to be in the role.
So is it something you see yourself doing for a little while longer yet?
Do you know what? I don't know. It's a good question. I've often asked myself when would be the time to move on. I wanted to do the women's team to get that across the line because that was very important. And I felt that it was quite an intricate sort of negotiation. A lot of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle had to come together at the same time. And I felt, given my experience with both Football Federation Australia, as it was then, the other owners and the other clubs and New Zealand football, that I was kind of in a unique position to know how to pull it all together as best as we possibly could. And now there's a couple of other things. I mean, the academy was very, very important that we got that set up and structured right. And now Paul Temple's running that very, very efficiently. And I'm strongly of the opinion that it's the best academy structure in the league. given the number of players we've got coming through and the setup that we run out up there now in Avalon. And there's a couple of other things. We've got a new, high performance unit that we're moving to probably this year, towards the end of the year. And then, we'll have we'll have a little look at it then and just see how everything is at that stage. But, there's always stuff to do. You always think, if I just finished that or I just finished that, I feel like I've done it. But there's always something, there's always another challenge that comes up, or there's always another project that you'd like to see through. So, yeah, I mean, there's always ongoing challenges. As long as there's ongoing challenges, it does, tend to keep you engaged.
Yeah, and final question before we move on to the Q&A. How have you been impressed with our women's team so far?
Absolutely thrilled. I could not have been happier. We knew it was always going to be difficult because we came to it very, very late, and that was part of the negotiation. So it got down to New Zealand Football and Football Australia essentially agreeing the terms of our entry. So while APL, which is the ownership group for the leagues, they of course were keen to have us in because, like I say, we've been working on it for about 6 years. And it was always sort of stopped by Football Federation Australia and their reluctance to add in another New Zealand team essentially to what they thought was their competitions. But APL or the other clubs never had an issue. The other clubs have always been 100% supportive of Wellington Phoenix, and they were keen. And it was identified that Wellington was going to be the next, because we've been banging on for it for so long. They'd already said Wellington was going to be the next club to be granted a W League side. What was in the old days with W League is now A League Women. And so it was penciled that we would come in this year. Mariners are keen to have a team. Macarthur are keen to have a team, but another year away. Western United are keen to have a team. So there are other expansion teams coming, but they agreed that we were to come in this year, in 21-22. But it was very late. We should have had, if we'd been signed, sealed, delivered in July, we've had a lot more choice around players and our pre-season plans. But the most important thing was just to get the team in. Do you know what I mean? That was the most important thing, because once you're in, you're in. Very hard to take a team out of a competition once you're in. So that was the number one objective, and then was to recruit a stronger player team as we could. Now, by the time we got to recruiting the players, of course, a lot of our New Zealand players we'd like to have recruited, and the Australian players. You got to remember that the structure of the team was confirmed quite late. The 11 New Zealanders and 7 Australians. So we didn't even know who we could recruit at that stage going into this. But by the time we got there, a lot of our first choice was gone. So we kind of thought, right, it's going to be a very young development side, but that's okay. I mean, we kind of thought going into 2020, the World Cup in 2023, that's actually a pretty good solution for us. And we knew it was going to be a big learning curve for lots of them, but we thought that was a good trade-off. And the way that they have played with such courage and determination, and just they give everything every single game. And it's almost like a fearlessness of youth. They just want to go out there and play well. Just being and sometimes the football they play is wonderful to watch. Really good passing, crisp passing, exciting, attacking football. I mean, Gemma's got them playing really, really good football. And yes, they've learned a lot. We've made a few times things have gone wrong, but that's okay. That happens in every level of football. But the fact that they won that first game against Canberra 3-0 was just so thrilling for everybody involved. But they came so close on a number of occasions. They've given a lot of joy to a lot of people in football in this country, and I couldn't be happier with how it's played out. If they only end up winning the one game and a couple of draws, then this is a success. But the fact that we've got through this first season, they've done the club proud, they've done the country proud with how they've played. I think it's a huge win for everybody.
Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Denise now for the Q&A portion, and then if we've got enough time at the end, I might ask a few follow-ups.
Very good.
Hey, David, you answered a lot of our questions of explaining to our listeners, what the team is composed of. What has been the pros and cons with the personnel there? It's different than any other team in the league.
And it's been challenging, in the same way the men's has, to have to relocate. And a team's first season, inaugural season, there are always challenges because it's new systems, new structures, new ways of management. All these are new to some of these players and some of this management team. I mean, we've run, as you know, we've run the professional men's team now for 12 years, and those sorts of things come naturally to us. But with the women, it's all new. Now, why we know how to run it management-wise, it's different for a coaching team, because you're now having to play games every week, sometimes 2 a week, which they're not used to. Now, that would have been a challenge in anybody's book, regardless. But now on top of that, we had to relocate the whole team to Australia for a year, is a massive call for such a young team, and that's what I'm extremely proud of how they've done that and how they've managed that. But there have been challenges. We've had to recruit some staff in Australia. To be honest, there's a whole lot of logistical issues that people don't see, and things like how do you handle payroll, how do you handle tax. You've got New Zealand tax systems, you've got Australian tax systems, you've got New Zealand superannuation, Australian superannuation. Well, we learned all this when we went to the men's team. We've had to replicate it for the women's team. And there's things like health insurance and the medical side. I mean, it's time consuming, and it's just messy, and it's fiddly, but you just do it. But like I say, we learned a lot when the men did it their first season, and now we've managed our way through it for the women as well. And now we're in a really, we're in a good space, and we know how to run it a team remotely. It's not ideal. It's a challenge for the players and the staff in terms of how they handle that with their relationships, with family and friends and partners and all of those sorts of things. But it's just one of those things. You can't do it any other way. You just have to do it and get on with it. And they've been really, really good. But these are all sorts of challenges that we've had to deal with.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. That's running a team abroad is not easy. Tell us a little bit more about your coaching duo of Gemma Lewis and Natalie Lawrence. I mean, that was such a big decision and a bold decision that you made. And how is that playing out during the season?
I've been thrilled. Absolutely really pleased. So Nat was in Wellington for a while. She's been and has been in Wellington, and was in the local federation or local federation down here. Gemma has been involved in the Future Ferns development program up in Auckland. So she was sort of a Nat then, when we were, because it's very much a JV with New Zealand football, this whole women's A-League women's team for the first couple of years. So when we looked at options, it obviously Gemma just knew the players. That was the advantage. She knew the players. She knew where they were in the development. She knew what we could get out of them. Although I think, to be honest, Gemma's been a bit surprised about how well they've stood up as well. But she's obviously she's got the qualifications, she's got the history, and she was working in a coaching role within the New Zealand football structure, so it made sense. And Natalie was her assistant up in Auckland, and that's been really, I think, one thing we were conscious of was continuity and just trying to make the whole season as natural as possible, so that the more that we could just utilize the existing structures and the existing relationships, the easier the transition was going to be in a pretty challenging environment. So that when most of the support structure were support structures that existed within FFDP in Auckland. So you've got the Alice, who's the video analyst. You got some of the medical people. The physiotherapist is actually Wollongong based, but was in and around our team last year. Was actually the men's physiotherapist 2 seasons ago. So he stayed over in Wollongong when we were over there, and he's rolled into the women's team, which has been really good, because he knew the club structures and processes, so that made it a lot easier. So try to keep it as normal as possible in terms of the relationships within the management team, and I think it's worked really, really well, because they all knew each other, they knew how to work together. There was always a lot of respect there as well, so that made that transition a little bit easier.
Wow, it sounds like that's a really good case to have a women's and men's team under the same brand. So.
Well, that's right. There's only one team. In going forward, the league APL has said they want to have an alignment of men's and women's teams throughout the A-League W and A-League men's team. So essentially, if there's an A-League men's team, they need to have an A-League women's team, of course. So that's why over time you'll see Macarthur and Western United will get one as well. Interesting to see what will happen with Canberra. So either Canberra has to lose its women's license or its team, or they'll get a men's team to to mirror the women's team, which I think is probably the most likely. But that, I mean, inevitably there'll be an even stronger alignment. We're already looking into our academy now, and Paul Temple, who's the head of our academy here, is looking to build out our women's program. So we have a full women's program or team at the moment, and we have a few women outside that team. So they play with our boys and different age groups to bring along their development. And we're looking at building that out next year. So we're already sort of up resourcing our women's program in anticipation for 2023 when we take over the team in entirety and by ourselves outside New Zealand football's structures. And we will look to build out that and have essentially the vision and the strategy, as it should be, would be the academy should be 50% men and 50% women. Yeah, that's just how it should be. And we should have the same amount of women's teams. We'll just need to work on the best structures to support those women's teams, because women's football is not quite as strong as the boys in terms of being able to play competitive games, which is crucial for their development. But Paul's already got some really good ideas. And to be fair, that's a challenge in Auckland as well. In FFDP, a lot of those teams play within boys competitions, youth competitions, to get competitive games. And we'll do something similar down here. But it's very, very, I'm absolutely convinced that the women's side of the academy will be just as strong as the men's side of the academy within a couple of years.
Awesome. I mean, the Ferns are playing abroad right now.
Right now.
Yeah, exactly. Can we expect any Ferns to return home?
I hope so. So we would hope that. I mean, the thing is, I think the team we currently have has developed so strongly is that you'd like to keep the majority of that together, because that's A-League men's and A-League women's essentially are development competitions for bigger and better things for players. Players don't. Well, ideally, players want to go into A-League men's, A-League women's, and then head on to the United States or Europe or wherever they want to go, or Asia, to further their careers. And so for us, the A-League women's team was a good opportunity to strengthen the development structures for young women players. And that's why our teams are very young. And we came quite late to the party as well. But we'd want to strengthen the team, I think. Again, this is within the context of 2023, the World Cup in 2023, is we want to help New Zealand football put out a competitive side for that competition. And if they think that their best opportunity is to bring back a few Ferns into that squad for next year, then of course we'll be 100% supportive of that. But we'll work with New Zealand football and with Gemma and to go, well, where do you identify some players that you'd like to bring into the structure? And Yitka Kumkova, to be honest, will be hugely part of those conversations. I mean, there are, as everyone knows, there are a few Ferns who currently don't have clubs, which is just not acceptable. They should be within a club. And as we build up to 2023, so if we can be part of that solution, then 100% we want to be part of that solution.
Great. That sounds awesome. I mean, it sounds like the star-studded international will be down the road, definitely past the World Cup, if you were to ever bring in anyone like that.
Yeah, I mean, my agreement with Football Australia when I met with their CE, I went over last year for 2 or 3 months and I met with them before I left. This was all part of the negotiation of getting an A-League W team across the line. And at that stage, New Zealand Football and Football Australia were discussing the terms of our entry and what it was going to look like. And I was against actually a limitation that we're currently under. Yep. And I said, well, the women should have the same regulations as the men's team, right? Which is there aren't any limitations on New Zealand players versus Australian players. And the only difference between us and the Australian teams is that New Zealand players are regarded as domestics. And that should be exactly the same for the women's team. Right. We couldn't get that across the line, so we have this 11-7 rule that we have now. And that if we sign an international player, like I don't know if there's certainly a number of the other Australian clubs have international players. Now, if we sign an international player, it has to come off our New Zealand player allocation number. So it has to come off the 11, which obviously doesn't suit us. Right. At this stage. But you could, I mean, if you look at that Adelaide United game that we played at the weekend, that player Warts, she's an English player, she scored 4 goals and Adelaide beat somebody 8-2 the week before. She got 4 goals, That's the difference an international player makes. And you'll get a lot of them in other, A number of the other women's teams have an international player, and they do make a huge amount of difference. Now, we don't have access to that. Well, we do, but we have to take off our New Zealand allocation, which is not, I don't think, is fair. But my agreement was with the CE was that the post-2023 season, the 22-23 season after the World Cup, essentially, then the women's team should have the same regs as the men's team. And that would then mean, well, we could look at international players. And, if you wanted to bring in a gun striker who's going to bang in 10 goals a season, I mean, that's the difference between coming sixth and coming second.
Yeah. When like Lynn Williams show up for a couple months or something, it's.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes a huge amount of difference. And the great thing about the A-League women is that it's quite complementary to the American system, the American National Women's Competition. So they're working on they used to have an MOU, which I think lapsed, but they're working on another one where they would essentially they would structure the competition so that they would run complementary to each other. So they'd both have, essentially a 48-week split into two. So 22 times 24-week seasons, which means you could go from one competition to the other competition. They don't overlap. And then there's 4 weeks of layoff and recovery and annual leave in there at the same time. Now, if they get that across the line, that's huge, because that would then mean an easy passage for players between both competitions.
Yeah, that used to work very, very well. The season's gotten longer in the NWSL, and maybe that's something that could be negotiated with. So we're going to turn to just some of our Facebook group questions, and these are kind of different categories. Let's start with just running the team. What's it like being in the? Danny Miller asks, "What's it like being the general manager of the Wellington Phoenix?" And tell us about the planning in place when the team actually does return.
Well, like I said before, it is a privilege. We don't, to work in. I've played football most of my life, not well. I'm not a great football player, but I've loved it. And to work in football in a sport you love is an honour, and it is a privilege. And the thing which I say to everybody who works in the office here is, it's quite a small office, so anything that you do can make a difference. Little things to big things. If you're working on it, the difference that you can make is quite. Like an example is the women's team. That's now hopefully put in place a development program for young girls in New Zealand forever. Now there is a pathway from amateur grassroots football all the way to professional football in Australia, New Zealand, and then hopefully onto United States or Europe or Asia or whatever. So it is really an honour, but there are some pretty significant challenges. One is the finances is a constant. It's a constant bugbear. It's a constant struggle. You never have, and it's only for the generosity of the owners that we've survived this long. It's most codes in New Zealand will tell you, except probably cricket and rugby, maybe league. It's a constant battle to generate enough cash to keep your organisation going. I went public about it. I was very surprised that when we announced the women's team and we went back to quite a few of the commercial partners we've talked to in the past, so you come and talk to us when you have a professional women's team, and they all turned us down. I was very surprised by that. And these are big corporates who said, they support women's sport and equality and all this sort of stuff and equity, and then they said, no, it doesn't fit our brief, or there's a group of young women who need support, and luckily we did have people come on board after that. But that was, even so, we're not at a space yet where the club can wash its face financially. We still have to get support from the owners, and that's always a big challenge. In terms of bringing the team back, the women's competition is obviously finished, so we were we were hopeful that we were going to get that last. They've got a game on the 6th of March, which we're actually going to bring forward a little bit. That's their last game of the season. Now, we were always planning that hopefully that would be a game in New Zealand, which would be fantastic. And I've got no doubt that if we had a game at Sky Stadium with the women's team playing, we would get 25,000. I'm absolutely convinced of that fact, because the support for the team is out. I know, I've seen it and felt it. It's out there, and that people would want to turn up and show their support. So that's very disappointing. The men's team, I think there is still a small chance that they could potentially get back for the end of their season's April. Maybe a couple of games at the end of April. If the government, you see these moves now, there is home isolation now, there is some pressure on government to do, to have pathways or what they call travel bubbles for professional sports teams. If that comes off, then there is a small chance we could get games here at the end of April, but we need quite a lot of that to come right. Not only do we need to have these travel bubbles for the sports teams where they can do isolation within a hotel, train, play the game, then go home. We also need to come out of the red light because there's no point bringing a game back if no one can go. No one can go to the stadium to watch them. So we need to be at least orange. So there's a number of challenges. I mean, we continue to hope that maybe that'll come off. Otherwise, we're looking at, fingers crossed, a return to normal for season 22-23, which will be an October start. That's what the league is working towards, an October start for both the men's and women's competitions. And I just hope we can't do another year like this. Surely we can't do another year. We're now 2.5 years into working within COVID structures, and it's. I can't. I talk about the financial challenges. If you look at our finances, our match day ticket revenues evaporated overnight. Season members, we used to have 5,500 members. We don't have anything like that now. We've only got a few hardcore that have renewed. God bless them. Corporate revenue's been tough. I don't think people truly understand the devastation that it's wreaking on professional sports because, so many of our revenue lines, and the cost is, the irony is not only has your revenue gone down, your costs have gone up because you're now having two teams based in Australia. So, no, it's been very, very tough, and I just hope that we're back to normal for October this year for the season 22-23 for both teams, because I think the fans will come back and they'll be back in big numbers. I think they want to see the women's team play. I think they want to get out and show their support for the women's team and everything they've done. We just need the government to help us get to that point where we can have these teams come and go.
Wooly Russell asks, what can we do as supporters to help the Phoenix?
That's a good question. So, like I say, a few people have taken out season tickets, even though they know there's probably not going to be any games in New Zealand. That's helped. I mean, the proceeds from the people who did take out season tickets got us through 1 month. It got us through 1 month, honestly, help us pay a few bills in 1 month that we had to, and it was in January. Support our partners, send messages of support to people like NZCIS, to Spark and Oppo, to Comrade, to Shot, to all our partners who are on the strips who have sorted out, and they've really, on the face of it, it is a commercial decision which would look, you do question whether there is a return, but there is still, the women are still, the teams are still playing, and there's still TV exposure, there's no games in New Zealand, but that support is crucial. So show support, reach out to those partners and thank them for their support of the Wellington Phoenix. That does have an impact. We've got messages back from our partners when fans have reached out and said, I really appreciate it. That Comrade who came onto the sleeve of the women, they had staff members reach out to their senior management team and say, we really appreciate you doing this. It's great for us as a company and a brand. And they fed that back to us. So they do take note. Buy their products, of course. Buy their products and say, we're buying this because of Wellington Phoenix. So that's sort of, and then obviously once the team comes back, buy a ticket, come to the game, buy your merchandise, anything to do if you can help support the club, all that stuff is worthwhile. But even the Facebook messages on game day, the Twitter, we read them all, we respond where we can. That we do notice it, and I think the women's team especially has noticed the support that's come out of New Zealand through a pretty tough year, and it is appreciated. But so even things like that, messages of support through social media is valued.
Awesome. Blake, anything else you'd like to add?
So do you anticipate that once we do return, that we will get like double headers or that sort of thing?
Yeah, when we looked at the season this year, the plan was to have double headers in New Zealand. We were looking at one in Wellington and one in Auckland, which would have been fantastic. But that was scuppered when the Omicron came through. So I think if you remember back in December, the government was talking about opening up November, December. The government was talking about opening up to Australia in February, so we started planning on March and April to have games in New Zealand for both teams. And then Omicron came through and the whole thing flipped on its head, and we were in the other way. It was more difficult to travel than it was. But, you know, all things being equal, we would love to, I've already flagged to APL for next year, we want to have the first, we want to have our first game in Wellington, and we want it to be a double header with the men and women. That would be fantastic if we could have that. And then a couple of double headers throughout the season, no doubt. It just makes sense. I mean, it's great for both teams. It helps us logistically and financially if we can have the two teams play on the same day at the same place. But it also makes, you know, the best things for the fans as well. They can go and see 2 games of football, and it turns into a bit of an event then. You know, it becomes a bit of a thing for the whole family to go out, because by definition they tend to kick off earlier with whoever's playing first, whether it's the men or the women, and then you get to have 2 games. So it tends to be a bit of an event, and we know if anything that people in New Zealand, it's hard to get people to come to live sporting events these days. Although we did pretty well last year. But, you know, they'll turn out for an event. And if we had a double header, men and women, I think people would turn out for that.
And finally, any chance of like fiend rounds, or, you know, as a thank you to try and negotiate with the league to have like a huge portion of the season at home doing like a New Zealand tour or something?
Yeah, yes. I quite like that as an idea. We've got to be a little bit careful, because the fans in Wellington get a bit upset when we take too many games on the road, because, you know, we're the Wellington Phoenix, they buy a season membership and they want to see the team play in Wellington. But then we also are New Zealand's only professional club, and there's, again, coming back to the finances, I mean, Auckland's massive in terms of corporates. You know, all our major corporate partners are based in Auckland, and they want to activate where they get the biggest bang for buck, which is where the people are, which is Auckland. We have an arrangement with Eden Park to play games there annually when we can, and, you know, up to two games a year, which I think is good. It's good for our partners and it's good for the fans up there, and some of the Wellington fans like the road trip as well. They get to go away. And the question is whether we can go to other parts of New Zealand. We've tried pretty much every major metro and some regional centres in New Zealand, to more, you know, varying degrees of success. We've had decent ones in Napier. We got almost 10,000, but you go to Eden Park and you get 25,000. It's a huge difference. We've had Christchurch a few times. Christchurch, of course, now struggles with its stadium. Once they have that new stadium in place, I think it would be natural. It's just whether I've sort of come to the conclusion that Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, when it gets this new stadium, makes sense. We've tried Dunedin a few times. I think Dunedin's just probably a bit too small to generate a decent crowd. You have to really be in excess of 10,000 to make it worth the while. We've tried New Plymouth. We've got okay crowds, 8,000, 8,500, which is good, because, as a percentage of their population, it's quite a lot of people that are turning up to watch you play. But yes, I think as a general concept, we are supportive of taking games to other parts of New Zealand, because we do understand we're the only professional team, and we like to think that we can spread football around New Zealand so other people can see professional football and they have to come to Wellington. It's just a challenge sometimes finding the right business model in each centre, and whether there's going to be a decent crowd that's going to turn up. But certainly, Auckland is almost a no-brainer for us, for both the fans and the population size and our commercial partnerships. And we'd like to look at Christchurch again, potentially when they have the new stadium, and then maybe other centres as well.
And a final message for the fans.
The fans have been fantastic. I mean, you look at, like I say, we keep an eye on, obviously, our social media channels, and our social media channels are right up there in some of the highest interaction and impressions throughout the league. Our YouTube channel was the #1 YouTube channel in the entire league. So we have more people watching us on YouTube than Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City, all these, Sydney FC, all the big clubs. And that's just the fans who get on there and like to watch the replays. And that's very, very important, that level of engagement. But our Twitter, our social media, Facebook is excellent. Like you said, we try to keep across them all with the small team that we have. But the fans have been good. I mean, the way they've supported the club through thick and thin. You know, we went through the Nix Out campaign when Football Federation Australia tried to get to boot us out of the competition, and the fans stood you know, shoulder to shoulder with us and led the charge against Football Federation Australia at the time. Through times when it's been really tough, you know, we've had a hardcore, you know, the Yellow Fever contingent have been magnificent in that regard, and now we see this little shoot-offs with the little corner of yellow in New South Wales. This has been fantastic. Those things matter, you know. Those things are very, very important, because it's when you see that as a club, you go, people haven't forgotten. They do value what we're trying to do. There is support there out there for us, which is so important for us and our commercial partners. I mean, we had some of the guys in the little corner of yellow were helping us pull down the signage at Leichhardt. I don't know if you saw that on Saturday night. I mean, not too many fans would be doing that. I mean, that's really incredible. I reached out to the guys, like, see if we find out who it was. I think it was I'm pretty sure it was the little corner of yellow guys, but they were there pulling down signage and helping us pack up after games. You know, when we don't have our normal support structures around us, and you're trying to do things, you know, on the smell of an oily rag, to have people like that wanting to get out there and help us set up the club and pull it down, it's just invaluable. And no, the fans have been fantastic. That's one of the biggest things for me, I think, is that we haven't been able to have games in New Zealand to repay the fans and their support over the years. And that's the most disappointing thing. Like I said, we wanted games back here in New Zealand this year to repay that faith, and it's just one of the most. It's probably the most disappointing thing from us as a club's perspective, is we haven't been able to bring the games back for the fans so they can actually be part of that again. But you know, fingers crossed. Maybe the men at the end of the season, and then otherwise in October this year. But no, like, you know, I can't thank the fans enough for everything they've done and the way they've supported us through some pretty tough times over the last probably 5 or 6 years now.
Well, I'll get you to stay there for one more moment, David. But to the people watching at home and on YouTube and on Facebook, I will say goodbye. I hope you enjoy the video. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And we will see you on the next video.